The message came in the form of a text. Thanksgiving at the house. Same time as always. Can't wait to see you. Love. Mom. There was no question mark. No. Are you coming this year? Just a blanket assumption like every year before that I'd be there, like I always was. I stared at the screen for a long moment, letting the familiar blend of irritation and resignation settle in. Then I typed back. Sure. I'll be there. Not because I wanted to. I had already made my decision about this year weeks ago, but I knew it would be better to let the performance unfold uninterrupted for now. Micah would be there. Of course, front and center. Our mother would hover, cutting his meat like he was still 12. Dad would ask him about jobs he hadn't applied for, pretending to care while simultaneously making excuses for why nothing ever worked out. It had always been that way. When we were kids, Micah once broke a neighbor's window playing baseball in the street. I was grounded for not watching him better. He got ice cream and a hug. I worked 2 jobs through college, kept my head down, built a career from the ground up. Every raise I earned was greeted with, "You're so lucky, Micah." On the other hand, once got a temp gig at an auto shop and was treated like he'd invented the engine. And still, when the bills piled up, it was my phone that rang. When the roof leaked, I paid the repairman. When Micah's girlfriend dumped him again, I was the one who picked up at midnight. But this year was different. I'd had enough. So I said yes to dinner. Not out of love or nostalgia, but for clarity, for finality. I was walking into that house with a smile and a secret, and I had no intention of letting them write the ending. 3 weeks earlier, I had already begun the first page of my own. It was a Thursday afternoon when Carol from across the street flagged me down by the mailbox. "I ran into your mom at the farmer's market," she said, squinting against the sun. "She seems thrilled about Micah finally moving out." I blinked. "Moving where your place?" "Apparently." Carol laughed. She said, and I quote, "Micah will finally have a place of his own soon, Serene's house. It just makes sense with how much Serene travels." My throat dried, but I smiled politely, nodding as if I'd known all along. I thanked her, went inside, and closed the door quietly behind me. Then I stood in the middle of my living room, stunned. They hadn't asked, not even hinted, not a phone call, not a text, just a quiet, calculated assumption. My house was being treated like a family heirloom they had the right to reassign. I paced for a few minutes, heart thudding. Then I sat at my dining table and opened my laptop. I didn't even hesitate. By midnight, I had sent a message to my real estate agent, Valerie, titled, "Let's Talk Options." The next morning, Valerie called. "You serious?" she asked. As serious as I've ever been. We walked through the steps together discreetly. I kept my curtains closed, deleted our emails after reading them. I didn't breathe a word to anyone. 2 days later, the listing was drafted. By the following week, I had accepted a private cash offer. The new owners were a retired couple from out of state, quiet, punctual, polite. In total, it took just under 10 days to sell the house. The paperwork was signed. I had already moved out of the master bedroom. A furnished rental near the coast was waiting for me temporary, just until I decided what came next. I sat in that rental one night with the sale contract in my hand, rereading every page. They would find out eventually, but not from me. They wanted to hand Micah my home like a gift. Fine. Let them try to wrap up an empty box. Thanksgiving was still 2 weeks away. I had plenty of time to smile, nod, and watch them walk straight into the silence I had left behind. And I knew exactly what I would say when they did. The driveway was already full when I pulled up. My father's truck, Micah's dented sedan, and a minivan I didn't recognize were squeezed along the curb. I parked a few houses down and walked the rest of the way, steadying my breath as I reached the porch. The door opened before I could knock. "There's my girl." Mom beamed, arms outstretched like she hadn't once accused me of being distant in front of extended family. Her hug was tight, a little too long. Her perfume had changed lighter, sweeter, but her voice was still laced with expectation. Inside, the house looked the same. Neatly set table, cranberry sauce in a glass bowl we'd had since I was 10, pumpkin pie cooling on the counter. Tradition, down to the folds and the napkins. But the mood was off. Dad barely looked up from his glass of wine. "Glad you made it," he muttered. Micah was already sitting in what used to be my chair end of the table, near the window. He didn't even try to hide his grin. "Nice of you to show," he said. "Long drive, I didn't answer." Just placed the wine I'd brought on the counter and smoothed out a wrinkle in my blouse. Mom was humming. She never hummed. She floated around the kitchen, hands too busy, smile too wide. Dad kept checking his phone like he was waiting for news. And Micah looked like he'd just closed on something he hadn't paid for. I sat down at the far end of the table, letting the tension settle around me like steam. No one said much as we served the food, though my mother did make a comment about how this could be Micah's last holiday at home. I raised an eyebrow, but stayed quiet. Micah smirked. I met his eyes briefly. He knew I knew. They were waiting. For a moment. A signal. Something rehearsed. I passed the mashed potatoes without a word, counting each breath in silence. Then my father cleared his throat and gave Micah a look. He stood, fork in hand, like he was about to offer a toast. Micah tapped his fork against his glass with mock ceremony. "I have a little announcement," he said, beaming like someone proposing a toast at his own engagement. My mother clapped her hands together softly. My father leaned back. Folding his arms, Micah turned toward me, his eyes lit with triumph. "I'm moving into Serene's house next week," he said. "Mom and Dad said it makes sense. You travel all the time, and I need a stable place." He sat back down like it had already been finalized, like I'd nod and offer him a spare key with a bow on it. Mom looked at me expectantly, the corners of her mouth trembling with forced enthusiasm. "It just makes so much sense. Honey, you're barely there. And it's such a waste to let it sit empty. This way, Micah can have a fresh start." Dad chimed in, not bothering to meet my eyes. "We talked about it. We figured you'd agree." I lifted my wine glass slowly, let the stem rest between my fingers, and took a long sip. Then I smiled gently, evenly, and set the glass down with care. "That's funny," I said, reaching into my purse, because I sold it yesterday. The silence that followed was absolute. I placed a large manila envelope on the table and slid it across to Micah. "Here's the contract, closed, signed, and filed." Micah's smirk drained from his face. "What, you heard me." He snatched the envelope, flipping through the pages with increasing panic. "You can't do this. I was supposed to." "You weren't supposed to do anything," I said. "You just assumed." Mom blinked rapidly. "Wait, why would you sell the house?" Dad leaned forward, his voice suddenly sharp. "You didn't think to tell us I looked at each of them in turn. Not angry, not defensive, just done. It's my house. It always was." Micah slammed the envelope shut. "This is insane. You're just doing this to screw me over." "No," I said quietly. "I'm doing this to stop being used." No one reached for their forks. The food sat cooling, untouched. My mother's lips parted, but she said nothing. I pushed my chair back and stood. "I hope you all enjoy dinner," I said, reaching for my coat. And then I walked out the front door like I should have done years ago. "Are you serious right now?" Micah's voice cracked with disbelief as he shoved the envelope across the table. "You really sold it!" my mother gasped, hand pressed to her chest like I'd just confessed to a crime. "Serene, how could you?" I had to find out from her. Micah snapped, pointing at me like I was a stranger. "I already told my friends I was moving in." I started packing. My father leaned forward, voice cold. "That was low. Even for you." I stayed seated, back straight, hands folded. "You didn't ask. You just assumed. That's not how families work." He shot back. "No," I said. "That's not how your version of family works." Micah stood abruptly, his chair scraping loud against the floor. "You're being petty, spiteful. I needed that place. I met his eyes. You needed accountability. That's not my job anymore. You think you're better than us now," he spat. "No," I said, standing slowly. "I think I'm finally not for sale." Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "He has nowhere to go." "That's not my problem," I replied. "He's 34. He can figure it out." Roy's face turned red. "We made sacrifices for you." I tilted my head, "And I repaid everyone, plus interest." Micah slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes jump. "You're unbelievable. Just buy another place and let me stay there until I raised a hand." "No, you're not even using it," he barked. "I'm not using you, either," I said, and that seems to be the real issue. No one spoke after that. I reached for my coat, slid one arm in, then the other. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. It felt like standing on dry land after swimming for too long, solid, steady. I walked to the door and paused, turning just once. I didn't ruin Thanksgiving. I just didn't volunteer to be eaten. And then I stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind me not to make a point, not for drama, but because I was ready for silence. 3 blocks away, I parked myself at a cafe still open for the holiday, ordered black coffee, and watched the sky dim. The texts started arriving before I even finished my drink. I didn't hear about it from anyone in my family. It came from Valerie, my real estate agent. "Just a heads up," she said over the phone, voice tight. "Your brother showed up at the house. He thought it was a mistake. Said he lived there. The Sandersons had to call the police." My stomach didn't drop. It didn't even flutter. I just exhaled. "He told them you promised it to him," she added. "They were shaken, but no damage done." The officer escorted him off the property. "Thanks for letting me know," I said. "I'll make sure he doesn't get the address to my new place." I hung up and placed my phone face down on the counter. 2 days later, the Facebook post started making rounds. It was a blurry photo of me, taken at some past family barbecue, mid-laugh, completely unaware. The caption read, "Some people forget where they come from. My sister sold the family house behind our backs. Our parents are devastated. We're heartbroken. Just pray for us." Micah's name was attached. So was my mother's, who had reshared it with a broken heart emoji and a comment that simply read, "We raised her better than this." There were dozens of likes. People I hadn't seen since high school chimed in with comments like, "Disgusting," and "I hope karma finds her." One even wrote, "She probably only visits for inheritance checks." I scrolled for a while, numb. Then I closed the app and deleted it from my phone. The next day, I started getting messages from old friends, former coworkers, a few clients. "Hey, just checking in, everything okay? Saw a weird post. Wanted to hear your side. Did you really sell your parents' home out from under them?" I answered none of them. Instead, I sat down with a cup of tea and went through my inbox, gathering screenshots. Every lie, every insult, every post that painted me as a villain. They wanted to punish me for stepping out of their story, for not playing the part. But they didn't realize I had stopped asking for permission long before I ever sold the house. And if they wanted a fight, I was finally ready to name what this had always been. The next call from Valerie wasn't casual. "Did you send someone to update your forwarding address?" she asked. "No," I said immediately. "Why someone called pretending to be you, knew your full name, old address, even your birthday, said you were having phone trouble and wanted everything rerouted." I stood still, letting the silence stretch. "But they couldn't answer your security question," she continued. So I stalled and hung up. "Thank you," I said. "That wasn't me." After we hung up, I sat down and opened my laptop. The email from my bank had arrived just hours earlier. Unusual login attempt blocked. It came from a device in a city I hadn't visited in years. Micah still lived there, still used the same phone number, still thought I wouldn't fight back. I reset every password, enabled two-factor on everything. I even changed my phone number and rerouted my mail to a P.O. box. The energy wasn't anger, it was calculation, because this wasn't about the house anymore. This was identity. This was safety. It was always a game to Micah, a script he could rewrite if he shouted loud enough. In his world, boundaries didn't exist, just delays in getting what he thought he deserved. And I'd been the one holding the line for too long. Now, I was done holding it. I was reinforcing it. I backed up every message, every email, every screenshot from the last month. I made a separate folder titled Proof. I took notes on phone calls, timestamps, names, details I'd once ignored because I didn't want to make it worse. But it was already worse. It was dangerous now. I knew it was him. He didn't even bother hiding it. The messages had gone from passive-aggressive to frantic. This isn't over. I just need to talk. You're ruining everything. And maybe I was. For him, for the first time. I started to consider what I hadn't wanted to before if this continued. I'd have no choice but to report him. The next move would be mine, and this time, it wouldn't be quiet. I unblocked my parents and dialed. My mother answered on the second ring. Serene put him on speaker. What now? There was a pause. Then the muffled rustle of movement. I pictured their kitchen, the laminate countertops, the weak hum of the old refrigerator. My father stayed quiet. Then Micah's voice came through. Casual, like nothing had happened. Oh, now you want to talk? No, I said. I want you to listen. If you try to access my information again, bank, address, anything, I will press charges. Silence. I have everything backed up. I've already spoken to someone. This isn't a bluff. He's just desperate. My mother cut in. You left him with nothing. I didn't flinch. No, he left himself with nothing. You kept him soft and angry and dependent. That's not on me. You're making this worse, she said, voice cracking. You know how much we've struggled. You've struggled, I repeated, and every time you did, I bailed you out. Every bill, every repair, every time he ran out of options, you came to me. Micah scoffed. You're acting like you're some kind of hero. No, I said. I'm acting like someone who's finally tired. I'm not your safety net. I'm not his exit plan. I'm done. We're family. My mother said quietly. You don't get to use that word after trying to ruin mine. There was a beat of silence, and then my father finally spoke. You've changed. I almost laughed. I really hope so. I ended the call without saying goodbye. My hands weren't shaking when I set the phone down. I didn't cry. I didn't second guess. The heaviness I used to carry after every conversation with them was gone. That night, I turned off every notification, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and opened my laptop. I logged into my legal insurance portal and scheduled a consultation. Not because I wanted to escalate, but because I finally understood the game. They weren't going to stop, and neither was I. The weeks slipped by quietly, the way time does when no one is taking from you. My apartment was small, 2 rooms, no balcony, creaky floors, but it was mine. No one had a key but me. No one knew the address but the post office and the leasing office. The silence was strange at first, like stepping into a house where the television had always been on and realizing it never needed to be. There were no more surprise calls, no texts, no guilt trips disguised as updates, just the sound of seagulls in the morning and the low hum of the tide rolling in behind the buildings. I bought a small coffee pot and a ceramic mug with a crack along the rim. I could have replaced it, but I didn't. It reminded me that broken things can still hold warmth. I walked more, slept better, ate when I was hungry instead of when I remembered I hadn't. I started a notebook. Nothing dramatic, just phrases that came to me when the air felt still. One morning, I stood by the window as fog curled in from the water. A gull drifted past. Effortless. I held my mug close and whispered. They saw me as an asset. I became a boundary. It didn't feel like bitterness. It felt like clarity. I hadn't set out to punish anyone. I didn't need revenge. What I needed was distance. Space wide enough to hold my own voice without theirs echoing over it. Micah hadn't reached out again. My parents had gone quiet. 2. Maybe they were regrouping. Maybe they were waiting for me to fold. But this time, I had nothing left to give them and nothing they could take. I sat down with my coffee and opened my laptop. A message blinked at the top of the screen, flagged from a name I hadn't seen in months. It was from Valerie. Subject line: "You'll want to see this."